Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I think we're gonna have a great time and y'all are gonna learn a lot from Jeff. Anyhow, our speaker tonight, our demonstrator is from a small town here in Virginia, near Strasburg. Around 2002, he was looking for an outlet for his creative energies beyond his day job as a graphic designer. Mr. Lefkowitz his work provided interesting challenges to him on a daily basis, but it lacked a tactile element that he sorely missed. And the work he produced lacked permanence, mostly materials with a short shelf life. Being a craftsman in his earlier life, Mr. Lefkowitz had always been drawn to woodworking and began renovating an outbuilding on his property into a shop, not knowing exactly what kind of woodworking he wanted to do. He said, some people buy sports cars at their midlife crisis. He renovated a shop using a table saw. Shortly after that, he took a Windsor chair making class with Mike Dunbar, that hooked him. Because something like hook, line, and sinker, I'm guessing. Anyway, he loved the feel of shaping wood and found it he was naturally good at it. He is quoted as saying, I love the process and I love the idea that chairs I made would most likely be around long after I was gone. I loved filling my house with handmade chairs. I went on to take 7 classes with Mike. Anyway, I'm not going to spoil you with any more information about him. I'm going to let him tell you more about him and what he does. And without further ado, I want to introduce Jeff Lefkowitz. All right.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I've done this demo once before at the Washington Woodworkers Guild, and I'll just continue that bio just a little bit so you know what I've been up to. Started woodworking in 2003 when I was 50. Didn't start until I was 50. Those classes with Mike Dunbar, really liked it. But what I really want to do as looking at reading fine woodworking and websites and things like that, I saw chairs by Brian Boggs. And that's I really want to make his chair, particularly this one here. And in 2006, I took my first class with Brian and took a couple more, one in 2008, 2010. And in between all of those classes, I was making chairs. And by 2009, I had retired from, went part-time from my day job and was working at home. So I had a lot of extra time. And Brian asked me if, and I was a graphic designer. So he asked me if I would do a class manual for the classes that he taught and asked me to help him as his assistant. So starting in 2010, I started doing class manual for first the rocking chair, which is on the my far left, and then some others of his chairs. And I would go down to his shop in Asheville twice a year and be his assistant. And then 2012, I started teaching on my own in my shop. And I did a count recently, and from 2012 until the end of this year, I will have taught 223 students. Some of them 223 chairs. Some of the students are the same guys. So people come back. Including 48 rockers, which just like astounded me that we could have produced so many rockers in that period of time. And I do these class manuals that accompany the class, and everyone gets one of these. They're roughly 100 pages with lots and lots of illustrations. And, I also, the other thing I work on is I draw chair plans for some other chair makers, particularly Curtis Buchanan, if anyone knows the very well-known Windsor chair maker. I'm doing plans for some other people. this is going to be my last year teaching. I'll be 70 in February, and I've decided that it's getting too hard to put on a 7-day class and 7 to 10-hour days. So I've been training other students of mine, instructors, and we have two instructors, other instructors right now. There's Canizaro in Vermont and David Reward in Connecticut. And next year, a guy named John Parkinson will be teaching in Durham, North Carolina, and I will be co-teaching with him. That'll be fairly close to you guys' interests. I won't be teaching any classes in my shop, but I'll be focusing more on, if you see my website, I have very detailed descriptions of all the processes in building the chair, and I'll be updating them and expanding on them so that they're more complete and more accurate. You learn a few things after seeing 223 chairs being built. And what I knew 8 or 9 years ago, I know more now. So I've changed processes and have a deeper understanding. So I want to. That is, these are written as a companion for the class, maybe turn those into a book or something like that. So I'm going to keep my hand in it now. Continue drawing plans for Curtis and others. Curtis has been a Windsor chair maker all his life, all his adult life, and so far I've drawn 25 of his chairs. I think they're large, like 2 feet by 3 feet sheets, 4 pages each, and the plan is to do them all while we still can. He's about the same age. So I'll still be keeping visiting, so I can chair making. So have any of you built a chair? Built a chair with me? Anyone else? No? Not a single chair maker. A chair.
A chair.
A chair. What did you do?
It was a shipping.
So quite different from these. So when people look at these chairs, if you look at if you look at this chair, you've got curved parts and angles to the legs and angles that way, angles to the side, angles to the back. And people look at these and say, how in the world do you figure out figure out what those angles are, and 2, figure out how to drill them? And that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to go through 2 examples of 2 different kinds of assemblies that are related, but one's simpler and one's more complex. And the answer is that it's actually really easy to do this, at least the drilling. It's with the jigs that I use. I can drill. There are 10 runs in this chair. I can probably do all the mortising for those 10 runs in half an hour, easy, and they'll be dead on accurate every single time. When we put these chairs together, we never dry fit because the joint between the tenon and the mortise is too tight. We're going for a difference of 0.005 of an inch between the diameter of the tenon and the diameter of the mortise, so they're really tight. If you drove them home dry, you would not be able to get them apart. So the drilling process is very, very accurate. And the process itself is, I can show you how to drill this chair in half an hour, but you wouldn't know how I got there, how I figured out the angles. And I'd like to show my students that even though they're coming to build a specific chair, I like them to see where the jigs come from and how that's figured out, so that if by chance they want to modify a chair or build their own chair, they would at least know the questions to ask. I wouldn't expect them to know exactly how to do it, but at least know the right questions. Or that other, we have that one back. I made these two frames. You can think of them as a chair with the back cut off. It's just much easier to see how they go together. And they're very similar, but there are differences. So this one is simpler. If you look at the front legs, they go straight down, and the angle here is going to be on it, and the sides. Fine there. And look at the sides again. The legs go straight down. Angle between the rungs is between the rung and the leg is 90 degrees. Same thing in the back. Legs go straight down. Angle between the rung and the legs is 90 degrees. The place where there is an angle is if you look at a cross section from the top. With the rung, the front rungs to be the front of the chair that's down on the bench, are longer than the back arms, which is very typical of a chair. Usually the front is wider than the back. So these are really the only angles in this chair. This chair is actually the exact same frame as this armchair. So the rung lengths are the same, the legs are the same. If the rungs were shaped properly and there was a back on here, you could make an armchair out of it. But if you look at this, the front legs go straight down, just like that one. But when you look at it from the side, the angle between the side rungs and the front leg is 90 degrees, but the angle between the side rungs and the rear rungs is more than 90 degrees, because the leg rakes backward. And then on the back, the same thing. These angles between the rung and the leg are greater than 90 degrees. And here, I guess they're less than 90 degrees here. They're not perpendicular, and the legs splay side to side. So in this chair, the front legs are straight up and down, and the rear legs rake backward and splay side to side. If you want to think, the way I learned about trying to remember those terms, splay is pretty easy, just splaying side to side, but raking is not a term that we normally use to describe an angle. If you think of raking like this with a rake, it's front to back. So the front legs, the rear legs rake back. So that makes this chair, on this chair, the angles for these rungs, all three of them, all six of them really are the same. But on this chair, these angles differ one to the next. So this is more. It's not really more complicated to build with the jigs that I use, but it is a little more complicated to figure out. Now the other similarity is that these chair frames are actually the same size at the top rung. So if I set this on top, what you would see is that they match exactly. The top rungs are exactly the same length, all four of them. So they start at the top with the same rung set, but then they vary because of the rake and splay of the rear legs. An example of this chair, this simple chair is one like this. This is called a Jenny Alexander chair. This is a woman who wrote a book back in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, about making a chair from a tree. And she would split out all these parts, no power tools, absolutely no power tools. Split out all the parts and put it together. And people just love this chair. And it's and the book that she wrote has been re-released recently, just this past year, by Lost World Press. So you can buy that book again. And but if you look at it, legs straight up and down, all the way around. So no rake or splay anywhere in the chair. This chair has an extra set of rungs in the middle, on the front and the back, so it has 12 rungs rather than 10. But other than that, in terms of construction, it's very similar to this. And then another example is this chair here. This is the first class I took with Brian in 2006. We made a chair very much like this. And the same thing applies. It's front legs straight up and down, straight up and down on the side, straight up and down in the rear. The rear rung is shorter than the front rung, so the front is wider than the rear. Again, very typical of a chair. So this is the very simplest type of chair to build and to figure out the angles for. This type of chair, pretty much every other chair that's here uses some variation on this construction. So the armchair is identical to this. That rocker on the end uses the same construction, straight legs up and down, rear legs that splay out and back, rake backward and splay side to side. Different angles, but the same principle. Bar stool has legs that are straight up and down, rear legs splay, rake backward and rakes and splay side to side. Same thing with all three of those chairs over there. So I'm going to start with explaining how to figure out the angles, drilling angles, and we're going to take this chair apart and put it back together after I show you how to drill all 20 mortises. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you begin by doing it by hand and then just morph to jigs, or had you always done it?
For these with Brian, we always started with jigs, and all the drilling is done on drill press. So that is a requirement for the method that I use. The Jenny chair, if you built that one the way she built it, you know the story then, yeah. She does it all by sighting, by holding a long abrasive bit with a long extension, no drill press. That chair can easily be done using the same methods I do on a drill press. It'd be much faster and more accurate. But some people, for some people, it's particularly if you're not making a living at it, it's what process do you enjoy? And some people don't want to use a machine and just want to do everything by hand, and that's fine. And there's a place for that. I kind of like the mix of machines where they make sense and then handwork where they make sense. So there's some things on these chairs that you can't do on a machine, like shaping those rear legs. And I love doing the handwork on those. But I don't want to, when I make a piece to bend, I have to make these long straight pieces. I don't want to have to straighten a board by hand and hand plane it and all that just to get it into a bending form. So I'll use machines, and I have no problem with with the drill press. It's not an expensive tool, relatively speaking, and it speeds up the process. It's I can't think of any other way that would be faster than a drill press. So so on this chair, the only angles we're concerned about are these, the angle of these rungs, of the side rungs relative to the front rungs, which, so you have to drill those mortises in the front legs at this angle, so they'll angle back correctly, and then the same thing, the relationship of the side rungs to the rear rungs, so that the assembly will go together just like this. And if you were to draw a trapezoid from center to center of all four legs, you can then figure out a jig for holding the legs while you're drilling, and that's what this is. So I'm going to try. Excuse me. So this is they're never perfectly exact, but that's roughly center to center of all four legs. And from this trapezoid, we'll be able to figure out how to hold the front legs and the rear legs in order to drill these mortises at the correct angle. Okay, so we're going to start. I'm going to take this apart. I waxed up these tenons before I came here because I felt like with this humid weather, they were going to stick. So stuck them on the lathe. It's amazing how well they hold together, even with waxing them. You can take all those side rungs out, all six of those. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just drilling the mortises for these. So that's really simple, 90-degree angle.
Already shaped these legs when you're drilling the mortises?
Yes, yeah, they'll be they're fully shaped. Yeah.
You start with green wood.
I start with air dried wood because it's easier to bend. But some people have been, the last couple of years, a lot of people have been successfully bending kiln dried wood, but you have to treat it differently. You basically have to rehydrate it and drop it in a big tube of water, let it soak for 5 days or so. And then in some cases, particularly with ash, which is what this is, you can bend it. So it is possible to work with kiln dried, but I've never done it. For the parts that don't bend, yeah.
So no. You don't steam it, you just drown it for 4 or 5 days. And
then you do have to steam it after that. Okay. Yeah, the rehydrating is just to
put it in, okay.
Yeah, you get it back. You're trying to get it back to the state it was before it was kiln dried. Then you steam it, and then you can bend it. People have been doing that very successfully with ash, and I think with walnut. You do have to look for very straight grained wood. That's the problem with just buying lumber that hasn't been milled specifically for chair wood. So when I mill lumber, I'm very careful about milling it as straight as possible, straight long grain. And that can be hard to find in just kiln dried lumber. So you have to pay close attention to what you're buying, and then close attention to how you're milling it before you even put it in the wall.
We got an online question. What's your favorite wood to use when building the chair and why?
I do like walnut, which is that Barstool is in walnut. It's really a beautiful wood, and it's really, really nice to shape. It's not too hard, works really well. In class, we do cherry, the rockers, cherry, and ash. That little chair in the back there is ash. So I use all three of them in class. This year, I'm teaching 3 rocking chair classes. I've got 2 more to go out of the 3 remaining I have. Every single one is walnut. So,
You're having luck with mahogany?
I don't think mahogany bends. I don't, no. I'm not, I don't think it does, but I've never tried to use it.
Rehydrate your stone dried wood. Did you put fabric softener in the wood?
I've never done it myself, so I'm not sure. I think some people have done that. I don't know if it's necessary or not, but there's a lot of people doing it, so there should be a lot of, some people are doing it, if you follow the right people. I think it's a lot of experimentation too.
Are your classes full with 2 more?
Yes, yeah, everything's full. So, but if anyone's interested, give me your name and email address, and I will let you know when we're going to do when I'm going to co-teach with the guy in North Carolina. We'll be doing 3 spring classes, all introductory classes. So the introductory class, you can make the armchair or the side chair, like that walnut one on the end, either one. And classes are 7 days. And you do, the parts are bent ahead of time for the chairs that you build, but during class, we do bending for the following class. So you get to experience everything.
Do you show how to, not knowing what the fixture looks like, did you show how to build a fixture?
I have the manuals have drawings of everything in it. I have large PDF files, full size, of the bending forms and other things that need to be full size that can be printed on a large format printer. So you can make your own templates and template route parts for bending forms. I've been selling jig sets. I don't know. David Duyard is selling jig sets up in Connecticut. So like a bending form, drying forms, things like that. Slot mortising jig. I don't know if John's going to do that, the guy in North Carolina. I'm not sure. But all the drawings are there. So if you take the class, you'll have all the drawings and you have full-size templates as well. So see me after class if you're interested in that. I forgot where I was. We're going to start with just drilling the mortises for the front rungs. They go in straight up and down, no angle. I have this very simple jig. It's just a block with a couple of dados cut into them. And you can set the leg, set both legs in there, actually, is the way we do it, set both legs in there. And so I don't know if these are going to go in perfectly straight up and down, but the idea is that when you drill them, they will be straight up and down. So one of the things we do is, if you look at these, the growth rings are rotated 45 degrees. That has to do with matching the wood movement in the leg to the wood movement in the rung. So that's one thing we do. So we do that. We get the legs all set up like that, and then we drill. So whenever I have this framing square here, the framing square represents the path of the drill bit. So the path of the drill and the bench. Think of the bench as the drill press table. When you're doing this mortising on a drill press, you do need to add a large accessory table so that your fixtures and your your assemblies are entirely on the table. Not you couldn't have here's a variation on this jig, which is just flat. Here's a variation for holding apart at an angle. So that would work, but what would happen if you do that? That doesn't work, does it? It changes the angle. So the drill press table needs to be big enough to accommodate anything that you put on it entirely. So drill press table, path of the drill bit. And when we drill these, we drill all 4 mortises just like that. These are now parallel or perpendicular. They're parallel to the path of the bit. That's exactly what we want. So we'll drill all 4.
You have to lay these out, or are they jigged up where you just slide it in the press? You have to lay out where you're gonna aim your drill bit, or is there a jig that puts it on center?
On center? Is that what you're asking?
You have to
there are
lay it
2
out with marking
Yes.
for drill.
Yeah, you don't, yeah, you just, well, you can, so we have something called story stick. I didn't bring it.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can mark the position this way with the
Right.
story stick. And then you can, Brian used to eyeball center when he's drilling. I can eyeball center,
Mhm.
but I found that most students didn't like eyeballing center. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I'm gonna show you how we do it now. So to mark center, there are a few ways to mark center. You could just take a piece of lead and run it across the top of 2 pieces that are the same diameter. That would mark center, but it's often kind of indistinct and it's hard to do on darker wood. So I made this little jig that fits on my square. And
That's clever.
mark center.
Yeah.
And the leg needs to be in the correct position, right? So if the leg is going to be rotated
Mhm.
if the assembly is going to be rotated, you have to rotate the assembly first before you mark center, so you get it in the right plane. But this is how we do it in class now. It's just something simple like this, and that students like this a lot. Okay, so we've drilled all 4 mortises. And now we can assemble the front panel. That's it. One panel done. So we've done 20 mortises, we've done 4. The rear panel in this assembly is essentially the same, it's just narrow. So exactly the same process as the front panel.
They're not splayed. They're
Not split, these are straight up and down. Yeah, they're straight up and down. So just a narrower version of the front panel. So that's 8 out of 20. So now comes the side rolls, the angle, which is the only angle in this chair. Or is that trapezoid I had? So if you remember, when I showed you this the first time, that these go to the center of all 4 legs. You draw a trapezoid. You can get that number by measuring a chair. You can get that number by, if you know the rung lengths, the tenon length, the mortise and tenon lengths. If you know the mortise and tenon and the leg diameter and the rung length, you can do a little math and come up with each side. It's in the case of the Boggs chairs, it ends up being the rung length minus 7/8 of an inch. If you do all that math, remember that, Tim?
Yeah.
You do? We had actually in Tim's class, we had 2 actual rocket science.
Figure out the trajectory.
So, so what we're gonna do is, so we've drawn this trapezoid based on the center to center dimensions of the legs. And we're gonna clamp this parallel, this edge, parallel to this, I don't need those. Okay, yeah, go.
Yeah.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay, so this edge is parallel. You can think of, again, this is the path of the drill bit, but this will also be the path of the rung. And then this end is up in the air. That's dimension is how high you need to hold the opposite leg when you're drilling for this rung, which is roughly that, 3 3/4 inch. That's how simple with this jig. Not much of a jig, but it is. With this jig, I can drill 6 more mortises. Okay, so this introduces a concept that we're going to be using throughout when we're measuring drilling angles and then applying them to jigs. So it's called rise and run. If you've ever made a stair or done roofing, I've never done either of those, but if you've ever done that, you've used rise and run. And we're using rise and run for figuring out, I don't know any of the angles in this chair in degree. I only know them in rise and run. So the angle of this is a rung. The angle of this rung can be described as 3 3/4 rise over 21 1/8 run. That's the angle. The beauty of rise and run is there are a lot of things that are really nice about it. One, if you were trying to measure this angle down here with a protractor, it'd be pretty hard to get it accurate. I guess you could. I was just watching a guy that was drilling a post and rung chair at angles and using one of those little digital boxes and zeroing it out on the drill press column and then raising it up 4.25 degrees or something like that. I guess you can measure it that way, but with protractor it'd be hard. So if your measurement down here, any little bit of measurement is off, out here it's going to magnify. So for one, we're measuring over quite a long distance. So if we're off by a little bit, it really won't matter. Two, if you want to draw this, make this part more accurately, or measure this more accurately, if you can multiply the rise and run by any number and still have the same angle. So you can double this, 7.5 over 42 1/4 would be the same angle. That block would be twice as tall and be way out here, be super accurate. And we do that. We take measurements off the chair and expand them to fit jigs. So I'll be showing you how we do all of that. But it's really a wonderful method for figuring out angles, describing angles, and then using those to make jigs for drilling. So this this is how we figure out the riser block for drilling the side rungs in the front legs. So now we're going to drill them. So the way we drill them is we have assembled this. We've assembled this this front panel just like this. And this is exactly how we do it in class. We set the opposite leg on the riser block, and we drill the mortises. So this is an example of what I was talking about, rotating the part when you're when you're marking center, you can't mark center here like that, even if that would fit in there. You can't mark that center, you have to mark that center.
Right.
So we'll usually mark the centers before we take it over to the drill press. Raise this leg, mark the positions with the story stick, mark centers with that jig, and then drill. Where they go? Side runs. And these should be. They should be vertical. Off a little bit, and that's okay. There's a huge amount of flexibility in the construction of the chair. So if they're off just a little bit, they will still go together just fine.
So basically, you're always drilling vertically.
That's another nice thing about this process is that the jigs are always flat on the bench. The bench is never rotated. The parts are rotated, but they're held pretty firmly.
You're drilling basically vertical.
Always vertical, yes.
90 degrees to the table.
You mentioned earlier that you never do dry fits, so we have the front assembly that's already.
The front, oh, okay, that's a good point. The front assembly is assembled.
What?
We assemble the front panel,
Glued?
glued and everything.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so to drill this, we assemble the front panel and then we drill for the side rungs. And that's exactly, it's a small assembly, easy enough to get on the drill press. So you can see that you need a drill press table that's at least this wide to get an assembly like this on there. And then the rocker is another 2 inches wider. So you need a pretty big table on your drill press, but that's easy to do. You can clamp it on or however, my drill press has T-slots, so I use those. But yes, this is assembled first.
You clamp that thing in place so it doesn't bounce when we put the drill on.
T-slots and clamps.
Same T-slot you were doing with the,
Basically, how do you hold this in place?
yeah. Hold that in place. Armstrong, right?
Woodcraft sells this.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter, if the drill press, if the drill is here and the table is square to the, it doesn't matter where it is, there's the only relationship is perpendicular.
Yeah.
So it can go on the drill press table any way.
How do you determine the front width, the rear width, and the depth of the chair?
Well,
Is that standard?
that's chair design. Yeah. So on these chairs that I do, Brian Boggs. So when Brian started, the first chair he ever made was this little one. He got the book by Jenny Alexander, and he made that chair. And over time, over probably a period of maybe 10 years, his chair design evolved to that, which is a pretty big leap. But I'm sure I wasn't there when he was doing that, but I'm sure he's experimenting. This is a very small chair, probably too small for most people these days. And so he's made the chair bigger. This whole thing's up all. He's eliminated a rung on the front. He's compressed these rungs on the side so that they're closer together. That allows them to put a taper starting way up here, making, even though the legs are heavier, it still has a fairly light
I like
to it.
that look better than that other look.
Like this one.
Absolutely. Yes,
It's
sir.
bigger.
That's the one I fell. That's the one I fell in love with. That's the one I wanted to build. Except when I took a class with Brian, this is the one we built. You build what the teacher tells you. Eventually we got there. But so that's a matter. There are some general principles. The height of the chair the front height of the chair has got to be 17 or 18 inches. And usually there's a cant, so the back is usually lower than the front by 3/4 to an inch, somewhere around there. The back is almost always narrower than the front. The back can only get so narrow, it can't get too narrow, that sort of thing. So he played with that, and then he played with placement of the slats for comfort and things like that. But those are all things that he did, and that's something that I've never actually, well, the only chair I've even started designing was that little one there, which was compared to this one. It was started with this, we made it a little bigger, added rake display to all 4 legs, made it a little taller. So there's always a place that you can start and experiment in. Okay, so we've drilled our side. We would then flip this around, drill these, drill all 6.
So you just flip the one edge to the other side.
Yeah, and the rungs are not going to be in there at this point. So this one, flip it around, drill that. So now we've drilled 14 mortises. The only jigs we've used have been these. That's it. We've done 14. And now we're ready for the rear panel. So same principle. We're going to go back to our trapezoid. And now this time, we're going to take the trapezoid and have the back of the chair representing if the rear rung is facing down, and just get that parallel.
So you just make this trapezoid for determining how to make your jigs.
Yes, and I don't have to actually make the trapezoid. You can draw it on paper is all you really need, or draw it on a computer if you're able to do that. And then what we're measuring is this height. And that should be roughly that, right there. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the front panel. The difference is that in the front panel, we elevated the opposite leg from the one we're drilling. On the rear panel, so if you had a rear panel like this, that was assembled. When you drill the rear panel, you take this. You elevate the leg that you're drilling.
Yeah.
So the front is like that,
Yeah.
the rear is like that, because these rungs have to get wider to reach the front panel.
You can see easily messing this up.
Yeah, 2 fronts, 2 back.
What can go wrong?
Well, when I was making this whole set of props, there are some processes that are easier to explain done not the way I actually do them in production. And twice on this chair, I think, and I might have, no, I don't think I did. I think twice on this chair, I drilled the side rungs going into the rear legs, so they went this way instead of that way. Because I'm so used to do it one way. And so
Now we feel better.
I would say it's a very accurate and nearly foolproof. It's not impossible to make a mistake, but
Same language in your shop as I do in my one.
nearly. Again, a little wiggly, but basically vertical. No, we don't. Oh, yeah, we do.
Do you have a jig to do your, the pieces you're putting in there now for the little, tenons?
How to make the tenons? I'm totally prepared. I was asked that question at the last demo, and I could tell you how, but I didn't have, I didn't have the, what I actually use. So a lot of people use a single wrench. So the tenons, so this is a very close diameter tenon. These tenons here are undersized, so they can go in and out of these. But this is very close. This is slightly undersized, but not much. So the tenons are 5/8 diameter. The mortises are 5/8 diameter. In thousandths, that's 625 thousandths. So I have a dial caliper that can measure that. And the way I learned was to take a wrench. This is a 5/8 wrench. 5/8 wrench, the opening is actually larger than 5/8. So I heated it up and hammered it together a little bit and got it to exactly 625 thousandths. And then as you're turning, you can use that as caliper. The problem with that is that you're using, the problem I've had is that you're using a tool called the beating and parting tool. It's 3/8 wide, and you're making 3 cuts. And each one of them has to be perfect to get a nice smooth surface. And I turn hundreds of rungs. I turn all the rungs. I do all the turning for classes. So the students do not turn in my classes. That'd be another whole week, you know. So I show them how I do it, but they don't do it in class. A lot of students have no turning experience at all. So even with turning hundreds of rungs, I've had trouble. You do want it to be maybe a little smaller diameter than the next, and you have these ridges. And part of making this good joint, if you can look at this one, is that this surface be really flat and really smooth. That's part of a component of making a good joint. These are dowel joints. What do you know about dowel joints in furniture? They fall apart right away. I've never seen one of these joints fall apart, but these are dowel joints. So we do a bunch, 5 or 6 things that we're paying attention to when we're making this. One is getting the correct diameter, and 2 is getting a good surface quality. So we can get if you're good, you can get the correct diameter with a single wrench. And Brian can do that, but I could never get it consistently. So I'm trying, one of the things that I try to do with students, and most of my students are just like you guys. I don't think are there any professional woodworkers in this group? No, so they're all hobbyists, amateurs. There's nothing wrong with that, and I actually really consider, I don't sell chairs, I really consider myself an amateur myself, but you do it because you want to do it and you love to do it, but you don't have to worry about how long it takes. It's more important to get it.
We're not on the clock.
What's that?
We're not on the clock.
Not on the clock. You're doing it because you like to do it. And for Brian, every minute extra that he spends on something is just money out the door. He can turn a rung for these chairs in 2 minutes, start to finish, done. And there are no sanding required. They're just done, 2 minutes. So a chair takes 20 minutes to turn the rungs. I can't do that. Mine take 5 minutes, and then they need to be sanded. But I try to focus on ways to get a result that students can achieve. So I came up with a process where we use 2 wrenches. So this is a roughing wrench, and then this is the final wrench. So this one's 625 thousandths. This opening here is 650. So with that beating and parting tool, we make our 3 cuts, and we're 25 thousandths over. And they may not all be exactly the same. There may be little ridges in between, but that's okay, because we put this down, pick this up, switch from the beating parting tool to a small roughing gouge, and I make very light passes across the part until this just slips over. And I get a result like that, which is a very consistent diameter and very good surface quality.
I know you're talking about drilling methods, but in terms of the mortise itself, obviously you actually fit those to the mortise, because I mean, if you have a
Yes,
drill
yeah.
press that runs out, the drill.
Yeah, so you would want to fit these to the mortise. And what I've noticed is that as a drill bit, so I buy a new drill bit every year, and by the end of the year, the same tenon that was tight at the beginning of the year is a little looser at the end of the year, and it's because as the drill bit gets dull, it makes a larger mortise, not by a lot, but enough that you can notice. So you would want to 525 is what I say we're after, but really that's a really good point. What you're after is a tenon that matches the mortise that the drill bit is drilling. But I will say, if you're going to do this, can I say something about Lee Valley and a Woodcraft store? Go to Lee Valley, buy they have premium lipped brad points. The five,
I was just gonna ask that.
but their premium lip brad point for 5/8 costs $30 last time I bought it. It's worth every penny, and just use it for chairs. And it makes a really beautiful surface, it makes a very accurate mortise, and the surface quality on the inside is really good. So it matches what you're doing on the tenon. And that, again, all of that is part of making a joint that won't come apart, even though it's a dowel point.
Get the hole 2/3 of the round piece, or how deep do you make the hole?
Oh, we don't make holes.
No holes here.
Mortise.
We make mortises. I like to use the term mortise because it's really a precise part of the joinery that this hole that you're drilling is. If you're doing it in a way that is precise, it'd be a mortise, just like any other mortise. And so we're drilling 1.25 inches deep. I just put a mark on the drill bit and we eyeball depth. And we have a caliper that we can double check and see if that's working. It'd be really hard to set a depth stop on a drill press for things that we're doing, because oftentimes you're holding a part like this and drilling 3 mortises this way in the rear legs. You're holding apart like this, and then each one would be a different depth, because this one's closer to the drill bit. So no one's ever complained about that in class. So it would really be.
Masking tape around the drill bit.
I just put a Sharpie mark on it. And you figure out where on the Sharpie mark makes 1.25 inches. Off a little bit, doesn't really matter. But yeah, I let them measure it, and they get a sense of where on that mark they need to hit, and then it's pretty easy. Okay, so
This drill bit you're talking about, is it kind of like a Forstner, think of like a Forstner bit?
no, it's a brad point.
Okay,
It's called a lipped brad point that has spurs on the edge.
right. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
There's a different, the cheaper brad points don't have actual vertical spurs.
Mhm.
They have just angles coming out.
Mhm.
Those would be more like utility brad points, and Lee Valley sells those as well. But the lip brad point for these works, they work really well.
Yeah.
What's that?
Makes a clean mortise.
Very clean mortise, yes, and that's what you want. So now we can we put this together. I'm gonna go back to here. We've drilled all 20 mortises, and the only jig we've used, or jig set, is that. That's it. Pretty simple.
So.
Gary was having a heart attack.
There's a mat there on the floor, right?
Have to get some Velcro.
So put this together.
Rungs are fast. They're not round, or are they? Are they
What's
round
that?
or fast?
Just for this. The rungs look like that. These are made great so that you can, I didn't put a taper in these, so it makes it easier for you to see what I'm trying to show you, which is whether they're parallel to the framing square or not.
Glue or you putting it together with-
High glue. That's another component of a good joint. So let me get this together.
True high glue.
True, well. There you go.
These are loose compared to what you, I mean,
Yeah.
the finished product. This is demonstration, so it's
Yeah.
loose.
Yeah. So high glue. So remember, we're making a tenon to mortise joint that's only about 5 thousandths. In tenon's always maybe 5 thousandths. That's the lower end for me. I try to get it as close to perfect as possible. And with this method, I can usually do it within 5 thousandths every time. So they're very tight. So if you were to assemble that with yellow glue, what would happen?
Not get it apart. Or be a hydraulic lock.
What would happen? You couldn't get it apart, that for sure. But what would happen to the glue? What would happen? You may not even be able to get it together. But what would happen if, let's assume you could drive that tenon into the mortise. You drive the glue out. So the glue shears off. So you may have a tight joint, but you may not have continuous glue bond. So that's another component of a good joint is continuous glue bond. So I use a product called Old Brown Glue.
Yeah.
It's true high glue. It has the only additive to it is urea. The only question no one knows the answer to, except the guy that makes it, is how much, what the proportion is. So that's like his secret. But it's a gel at room temperature, and you heat it up. But it is true high glue, and it has a very long open time. That's another. Has an open time of 20 to 30 minutes. Lots of time to work. But the thing that makes it useful in this kind of assembly is that high glue, one characteristic of high glue is that it reactivates. So you use high glue, when you use high glue, it's hot and wet. So it's liquid and it's 140 degrees roughly. And if you have dry high glue and apply heat and moisture to it, it will get sticky again and it will combine with new glue. You can add glue. So if you want to re-glue a joint, you don't have to scrape off what's there. You just add new hot high glue. It will reactivate the glue that's already there and combine with it. So we use that quality of high glue to get a continuous glue bond in a tight joint. And the way we do that is prior to assembly, we'll cover the mortise and the tenon with a very thin coat of high glue, really thin. Wipe it on, wipe it off, and let that dry. So that's called the sizing coat. The sizing coat dries and soaks into the wood, like it grows roots into the wood. Can't be sheared off. So you can size it today and come back a year later, and it'll still be there, ready to get sticky again when you apply more high glue to it. So we size all the joints and then let them dry, and then at assembly, we apply more high glue, which is hot and wet. The glue applied at assembly reactivates and combines with the glue that's already present, that has already soaked into the wood. And so the glue at assembly its function mainly is to reactivate the sizing code and to provide lubrication for the assembly, but most of that gets sheared off. But the sizing code remains inside the joint, and you get a tight joint and a continuous glue bond. So that's we've hit most of the highlights on how to make a good joint.
And you heat this up, this old brown or whatever it's
Yes,
called.
it's a gel at room temperature. So you heat it up. I use a bottle warmer. Perfect.
You put the dry before you drill. You have that mortise.
Like if you do the front,
No, you put them together, you'll never get. I have had to take assemblies apart, but you got to do it right away. I put a spreader between this. It was just assembled. I can put a spreader between this and pop them apart. So that is useful if you have. We've occasionally, when we've assembled, have driven a joint all the way through. Well, not all the way through, but part of the way through. So we can get it apart. We can. There's a way to fix that. You have to get it apart, and you can do that. But after it sets in about half an hour, and then over a day, it's not going anywhere. But you can get it apart right away, and I have had to do that a few times.
If it was older, by heating and moisture, you could get them apart. You could grease them.
I
Does it come
tried to
apart?
take. I have tried to take runs out that I've assembled, and they're really hard. I've had to cut them off right at the leg, drill a smaller diameter, try to right through the center, kind of pick out. You know, it's not easy to get them apart, which is good. That's what you want with a chair. So there's another thing I want to. I'm going to ask you a question. If you look at this assembly, the angle of the run relative to the front legs and the rear legs remains the same, whether the bottom is down, whether the front is down or the top is down. So this, if you add these two together, this angle and this angle, it'll add up to 180, right? But so my question is, why is the right block or the front panel higher than the rise block or the rear panel? You can't answer.
It's the difference between, it's
You don't
probably the
remember.
difference between the obtuse and the acute angle.
Rise and run are different.
Those
The runs are different.
the runs are different. Yeah, well, the runs are different, and then the rises are consequently different. This is a longer run, so the rise needs to be higher. This is a shorter run. You can think of it as a continuum. So let's see, we're back to our trapezoid. Let's slide that in place.
Okay.
So we have this for measuring the front panel. Now the front panel was 3 3/4 rise over 21 1/8 run. The rear panel was 2 3/4 rise over 15 5/8 run. Both of those, remember we talked about being able to describe a single angle multiple ways. This is an example of that. So I put this mark here. This mark here is the run of 15 5/8. You can see that lines up with that. Same angle, different rise and run.
10 degrees.
What's that?
10 degrees.
10 degrees. Yeah, but how do I measure it? No, how do I?
Trig,
What's that?
trigonometry.
Trigonometry. I never took that.
Look that up.
Any questions so far?
Elmer's glue would not work, huh?
The chairs I made with Mike Dunbar, we made with white glue, like Elmer's glue, and they started falling apart. The joints started failing very quickly. I would stay away from it. He did a lot of other things that made the joints fail as well, but I didn't know any better. He was the only instructor I had until I got to Brian. Once I got to Brian, I said, "Oh,
He uses high glue.
he just high glue."
See some makers using epoxy.
It was the next option.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't use high glue for outdoor furniture where it gets wet, but indoor furniture is great.
Jeff, you got a question?
I kind of nerd out over the old stuff. So these mortise and tenons, thousands of a degree, once you get them together, they ain't coming apart. How do those joints compare to 17th, 18th century chair makers' chairs, or like were there guys like you back then that fit that well, or are we better at it now than they were back then? By we, I mean you.
Well, I doubt that they had dial calipers back then.
Right.
And they didn't have drill presses, that's
Right.
for sure. So, I mean, their chairs hold together. Their chairs hold together. I know I don't know about, Brian was doing a chair that went together without glue as an experiment. And it was based on the Appalachian chairs made in the hills. And, but he needed to make it out of really specific combination of wood. So the legs were soft maple, always, and the rungs were hickory. And you would make the tenons larger than the mortises. And then you would jam them together. And because the soft maple was soft enough and the heart and the hickory was so hard, they would go together. But the other quality of that combination is that there's a quality in soft maple where over time, as the rungs expand and contract during the seasons, eventually the tenons will open up. That's why the chairs get loose, but not with soft maple and hickory. The soft maple just kind of goes back and forth. But other chairs, if you put them together without glue, eventually they would fail because as each time the rung gets a little bigger and then gets smaller, the mortise doesn't get all the way back. And but glue, that's the purpose of the glue, is kind of prevent that from happening. Eventually it'll fail, but not as soon. So I'm not sure what level of precision beyond that. I'm not really sure what level of precision makers were able to achieve.
They'd have to use a brace and bit to.
Yeah. So it was all, but there are winter chair makers that are making very, very, Curtis Buchanan does not use any power tools, and his chairs are solid as a rock. He's doing everything with the brace and bit, and he's carving out those tenons by hand and getting, well, actually he does use a lathe. So he is getting some of the tenons perfect. But he's getting the tenons in the understructure, the legs and the stretchers, he's getting perfect. But the tenons in the top of the chair, like spindles, he's carving by hand. So you can actually get a pretty good level of accuracy. But the most accurate and the fastest, and trying to keep those two tenons in line with each other is a lathe, by far is the best. Well, they did have spring fold lathes back then. You can get pretty good with spring fold lathes. So. Okay. Any other questions? We're going to move on to this guy here. Okay. Y'all understood that perfectly?
He did.
Okay, so let's take that down. So if you remember, One thing I want to show you is that, again, the trapezoid at the top is the same as the trapezoid for this chair. So the rung set at the top, all four top rungs, seat rungs, are identical. So in this chair, the front panel matches the front panel on the simple chair. I'm gonna set this one up. Front panels match, at least for the we don't need that. At least for the front rungs, they differ in the side rungs that get drilled. The mortises that get drilled into this front panel differ from the mortises that get drilled into this front panel. So front panel rungs are perpendicular to the legs. Legs go straight up and down. The side rungs are perpendicular to the front legs. The front legs go straight up and down. The rear legs rake backward. So there's an angle to this mortise here on all the side rungs. And then the rear legs also splay side to side. So there's an angle here. So where in this chair, we only have one trapezoid. In this chair, we have four trapezoids. So the first trapezoid is for the top rungs, which again matches this chair. The second trapezoid is going to be at the level of these side rungs, the lower rungs. So at this level, all the way around the chair. Obviously, I can't put it there. So I'm going to show you the difference between this trapezoid and this trapezoid. And I'm just going to. So remember that the front panels are the same. So the front leg, front side of this trapezoid on both are the same. But at these lower rungs, the lower rungs, you can see how much longer they are. This rung is 1.5 inches longer than this rung. So that's what you're seeing here. And they also, because the legs are spreading side to side, they're also getting wider apart. So that's what you're seeing, this trapezoid relative to this trapezoid. And technically, there's another trapezoid at this level, but because the side rungs, the middle side rung is equidistant between the top and the bottom rung, you can figure out the two trapezoids, and from the two trapezoids, you get your step jig. And for the middle rung, you just split the difference. Okay, that's 2 out of 4. This trapezoid here, really half a trapezoid, measures the rake of the rear leg. So we can get that number by coming straight down. We know that this is 1.5 inches. We know the distance between the rungs. We know that this one is 1.5 inches longer than this one. So if we put a mark here, this should be the middle of the bottom rung. And we know that and we mark out 1.5 inches, that's the angle. And we're going to need that to make a platform to set the rear panel on to get the rear rungs vertical. I'll show you all that. But we're using, point is that we're using a trapezoid again to figure that out. This one actually is 12 degrees. That's the only angle I know. But we do figure it out by using the, this is an example of one we take from, this is an example of one we take from the dimensions of the chair. We have a story stick that says these are so far apart, and these two are each have a certain length, and difference in length between them are 1.5 inches, and they're in line here, but they're all canted on one side. So the what is that? Does that have a number on it? I didn't write down what that was, so I don't remember. Whatever this distance is, 1.5 inch rise over whatever this distance apart is the angle. And that's what this is. So that comes directly, knowing the distance the rungs are apart and the length of the rungs, and I can figure that out. Same thing in the back for the display. Here's our fourth trapezoid. Before this chair was assembled, this would have gone right through the top of the middle of the top rung. The reason it's not is because you can see that there's a gap here at the bottom. So this chair is, these tops are raised up a little bit, but before they were drilled. So this edge goes right through the middle of this rung. This line goes through the middle of the bottom rung. The difference in length between the top rung and the bottom rung is 3/4 of an inch. And that difference is distributed on each side. So the rise would be half of that 3/4 of an inch, which is 3/8. And the run is 4 5/8, which comes from the story. So that's the angle. 3/8 over 4 5/8 is the angle. And we can apply that to the drilling. If you extend that out to 12 inches, you get a rise of 1 inch. So this is the same platform jig as this, but you just have screwed a riser block on it that's 1 inch. From here to here is 12 inches. That's the rung, and the jig rests on this back edge here, so that's 12 inches, and then this is 1 inch. And then if you may not be able to see this, but you can compare this. You can set this up here, and you can see that that's the same angle. So this is an example of taking a short rise and run from the chair and applying it to a jig at a same angle, larger run, larger rise for more accuracy. You want to make these holding jigs a size that's functional. So if you made them 4 5/8 long, they would just be too short to hold apart. So make them 2 feet long, they'd be cumbersome. So 12 inches is a nice number for this. Okay. So we're gonna knock this one apart. Let me take everything apart. I'm gonna leave this. So you've seen this before. Straight goes in here. Both legs like that, and we get this vertical. So simple. That's the front panel. At this stage matches exactly this front panel. Once we drill these, they'll differ. It'll differ. Then the rear panel. Now this rear panel differs from this rear panel because the legs splay. So if we were to we were to put these in here, not a problem. Huh? That's why we need this, which has that rise and run we just took off of that trapezoid for the rear panel. And then there's the roof. So that's the drilling jig for the rear panel, for the rear legs. And this is exactly what we use in class, is this jig with that riser block. Different rear panels may have a different splay. The rocker has a little more splay. So the riser block on the rocker is 1.125. The point is that it's so easy to change these things out. Just have a couple of screws in the top here and put riser blocks in and out. So you drill, set both of these in. The other complication we have in the rear legs is we have to rotate them to the angle of the slats, but that has nothing to do with what we're drilling here. So we do an extra step on the rear legs, but we do end up having them in the jig like this and drill more mortises, and then we can assemble that. So the step we figure like a chair like this. These legs, the legs have a plane like this here, and they have to be rotated to accommodate angles. It's entirely separate from drawing angles, but it is something that we do.
So the tenons bottom out in the mortise.
Yes.
They do. So when you drill on an angle, there must be a particular side of the hole of the mortise that the mark goes to.
The low end. So if we were drilling this, we would bury that 1 1/4 mark on this end here, and on this end it'd be deeper. So we always want that maximum. We always want that full 1 1/4 depth at the lowest measurement, and then we have more on this end. So technically they only bottom out in one spot, probably a little gap in there. I've never taken one apart. I was going to say something about that. Oh, I was going to say about the tenons. There's another feature of the tenons is that the flat, the mortises are 1 1/4 deep. The flat of the tenon, this one's actually 1 1/4, but when I actually turn them, this is made for going in and out of a part. So I have to make them completely flat. But actually what I do 3 cuts with that 3/8 feeding and parting tool. What do I get? 3/8 times 3. 1 1/8. 1 1/8. So the flat of the tenon is 1 1/8. The remaining 1/8 inch is a flare, flares out towards the middle of the rung. And what that does is when you install that tenon into the leg, it really, that extra little flare really fills that mortise nicely. If you look at the joints on these chairs, they're very tight, even where the rungs meet the legs. Okay, so front panel and rear panel. So all 8 of these mortises are drilled with really just one of these with a riser block on or off. So you don't need 2 of these. I have 2 to keep the keep the momentum going when I have 3 students, but you can just use 1 and just switch out riser blocks or not use 1. So this plus a riser block, you get all.
And you just attach it with the screws here to the riser block.
Yeah.
If you want to use just one of them.
Well, yeah, that's all you would need. But
Yeah.
in a class situation, I've got students cycling in and out.
Right.
And I like to set up one student and have once in drilling, setting up the next student so we can cycle through. So now the side rungs. So I'm going to go back very briefly. We're going to talk about the front panel. Let's clamp this again. This is the top rungs. Front panel. Side rungs into the front panel. And we measured it like this, right? Then we need to do the same thing for the bottom rung. So that was the top rung. Now the bottom rungs. That's not going to work, right? We need, because of the different trapezoid, we have a different height here. So what we do is make a exception. So that 3/3, that matches. And top, middle, bottom. That actually matches, but I'm not sure that. Top, middle, bottom. That's just a coincidence. Okay. Because this height is for the bottom rung.
Yeah. So that's about,
This was for the top rung. This was for all the side rungs and for the top rung. Even I get confused. Side rungs and rear panel. This is only for these side rungs, top, middle, and bottom. Oh yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, top, middle, bottom. Hard to be a coincidence, isn't it? Top, middle, and bottom.
well,
That's
isn't this, and this is the same at the top and the bottom, isn't it? On that
This
square one?
On this one.
Yeah, on the square one, yeah. So that would line up for both.
But we're measuring the bottom one. So on this chair, these two happen to be the same.
Yeah.
That's a that is a coincidence. So that's why I didn't want to.
Right out.
Here's the bottom. Now we measured the top, which did match because it's the same rung set as the top here. And then because the rungs are evenly spaced, the middle is split the difference. So 3 3/4, 3 1/4, 2 3/4. And the run changes for each of them. So the run on this one is longer than the run I have this one. Well, no, actually, so the reason these two match the tops because the run at the top, the runs match. They're both 21 1/8. They vary a little hard. Yeah, they vary as they go back. So anyway, the side rungs are evenly spaced, so these are split the difference. And this is very similar. I just made this big wide jig, but this is almost identical to what we use for drilling the rungs in the front panel of these chairs. So we'll do that now. Okay, so here's our front panel. And I'm going to set this. Oh, these are rungs?
Yes.
So we now have sets of rungs that are different sizes. This is top, middle, and bottom. They get longer as we go down. So we want to, so if we want to drill the top rung in the front panel, we'll use the top step, and then this rung vertical or close to the vertical. Then for the middle, we'll use this. What that does is it cants this rung in, and then the middle rung would be vertical. And then for drawing the bottom step, bottom rung, move to the bottom step. Both of these are canted in, and now this one's vertical. Easy. Except you can't, it's not, it's almost foolproof. So I had I was teaching a class, I had 3 students. We were doing this process. I had 1 student at drill press. I was setting up the second student. I was telling her, top, middle, and bottom. The guy at the drill press had just finished all 6 rungs. He said, you can guess what he said. What did he say? He said, I didn't do that. So I said,
Your knee just went up.
He said, whoops.
I said, which step did you put it on? I don't know. So I happen to have 3 of these. I happen to have 3 of these. We stuck them in the chair, and we lined these up so that they were parallel to this leg, and then we moved them onto the. You would do it on. You would put them in here if you were trying to figure that out. Move them until these were vertical. So like here, if they were on the middle step, and all 3 of them were in line vertical, then you know he used the middle step. Well, he got lucky. Because he drilled all 3 side rung mortises on both legs at the middle step. And Brian had always told me that there's so much flexibility in the chair that you could drill all the mortises at the middle rung angle, and chair would go together. This would go this way, this would go that way, and go together just fine. So, so we proved what he was. I didn't have the guts to do it on my own. So that's pretty simple. And this is exactly how we do it in class. 1 step. A 1-step jig, 1 for each
It
one.
says top, middle, bottom. Can't mess that up if you read it.
That's true, you gotta read it.
And in this assembly, because the legs are straight up and down, it means the run is the same here as it is here, all the way down. So this step jig can be anywhere along the barrel, the cylinder part, not the taper part of the leg. These legs don't have taper. They can be anywhere. But on assembly with splay, the run is narrower at the top than it is at the bottom. So you have to move the jig in line with the mortise drilling to get the right run for that rise. Okay, so that was all the easy part. Now the hard part. So we're gonna do the side rungs into the rear panel. you got a problem. That's not gonna work. So remember the trapezoid that we had for the rake of the rear legs, this one, I've got it here. That trapezoid, we're measuring the rake of the rear legs. So we made a platform. There we go, vertical. And if you look at this, this one. So if we take this edge and go up perpendicular to the bottom here, that's where the angle comes from the platform, from the rake and splay, from the rake angle, the rise and run of the rear leg. That's where this angle comes from. So that takes care of that.
Those are parallel now, vertically.
They should be vertical. If they're not vertical, they should be. And then one thing you have to be careful about is that you have to get the leg parallel to the plane of this. Otherwise, so if you look at this, when you set the leg on the platform, this needs to be parallel to that. Otherwise, you'll get the wrong angle. If you do this, as you do that, the angles are going to change.
Right.
You do have to pay attention to that. But you got that. So now we have to take care of these, and each one of them is different, right? So we need our trapezoid again. The rear, need both of them,
Rear,
top and bottom.
like in that square chair, but one more.
Someone want I've got someone to introduce you to in Washington. He said the same thing, and that actually is an excellent idea. If you were to start, that little chair is a great place to start.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a great place.
With the cheapest pine I could find.
Okay, so we're drawing into the rear panel, so like this. These are the top rungs. And we're going to make the equivalent of step two, which is what these are. I'll tell you in a minute
Should
why.
we turn this around so they can see the,
Yeah, why not? Upside down. That match?
yep.
And clamps on that.
Just pretend it
That's close.
Okay, so that's the top step. That would be the equivalent for the rear of the top step. And we do the same thing with bottom row. That would be the bottom step. The middle step would be halfway between. Okay. One other thing. that, remember, we needed to keep that leg parallel to the long edge of the platform. So I made this to help with that. You just clamp that in place a little this way. And then so what I want to do is set this on here, and this keeps it parallel. Because because of this pad, we're raising this end the thickness of the plywood. That's why I have this. We have to do that same thing.
Or you could just run across the edge up to it.
But now we need to add our steps. So if we're drawing the top rung, we would add the top step. And then remember what we said about an assembly that has splay to it, that the run is shorter here than it is here. So where you're setting this has to be in line with the rung that you're drilling.
It still has to be parallel.
The leg should be parallel to the platform. The platform can be, yeah, you probably need a hard. I don't actually do it this way. So. Yeah, I want you to, well, I don't want you to come and take my class. I'm not teaching anymore.
This is why. Okay.
But it's easier to explain the principle of this.
Yeah.
But let me go through this and I'll explain why I don't do it this way. And I'll try to explain how I do it, how I actually do it. So this is vertical. This one should be canted in, and this one canted in more. And we move to middle step. Move this under the middle. Now this one's vertical, this one's canted out, this one's canted in, and they're still vertical this way. No, they're not. This way. Okay, so we have to have the rungs this way.
Oh, okay.
And that's how you make the save. I did that on purpose. So, okay, so we're on the middle step. This one's vertical, this one's canted out, this one's canted in, and the vertical this way.
And now we believe you.
Yeah. And one more bottom step. Under the bottom step, parallel. This one's vertical, these two are canted out. They're all vertical from this plane.
The shim should be further towards you.
Yeah, under this one,
Oh, I
under,
got you.
under that one, yeah. That's it. Now, here's the reason I don't do this. Now, on a small chair, like actually on the Jenny chair and on this chair I actually did it. Well, actually, I didn't need to do it like that because I'm not doing no regular splay. So these were simple, just two riser bars.
Right.
But imagine, so you have an assembled rear panel that you're drawing these side rungs into. Imagine if it was a rocker. And you have this platform, and you have these step jigs, and you have this, and you have this enormous rear panel with 6 slats in it, and try to maneuver all of that into position, hold it in place, and drill. That's a big part to put on the drill press.
Yeah.
So in class, but so does everyone understand what we've done here? Yeah, okay. But in practice, it's awkward in most situations because parts are so big. The assemblies are so big. You have to have a fully assembled rear panel. So in practice, what we do is we can drill these side rung mortises into an unassembled rear leg. And I'll show you how we do that. This, do I need a rear? I need a rear leg. Okay, so we're going to use, so here is my actual step jig that I use for the front panel. And then I use another step jig for the rear panel. I'm going to show you that this will not match these. So that's the bottom. It's close, but it should match. Goes from bottom, the shortest one is the bottom, middle, and top. They get longer, higher. Top is always the highest, bottom is always lowest, but not on this one. It's the opposite. And so we're going to use this platform here again. But we're going to put a riser block in there to get this angle.
So make it so you could do the leg all by itself.
All by itself, yeah.
Mark it out with your storage stick, top, bottom, middle.
And then you also remember I talked about you do have to deal with the rotation of the leg. That's a whole separate issue. I'm not going to get into that. You deal with the rotation of the leg, but then you do put it in this jig, mark it out with the storage stick, and drill. But we still have to rotate the leg. So essentially, when we were drilling on the platform, for each one, we're rotating the leg to a different angle. And we still have to do that. I don't use hand tools for this. I don't want to bring my drill. But let's see if these match. Same angle. This angle and this angle are the same. They're the angle of the rake of the rear leg. So we don't need this at all.
Spins. I'll have it.
That was a long splinter. Okay. So we have a rear leg. And we've already drilled the rear rung mortises. So the way I usually do it, because the legs are long, is I have one rear leg, and rather than put them both in the jig, we only drill one at a time. I put just a dummy leg in there. This is the same diameter, just so I can clamp. And we align this mortise for the top rear rung with this mark that I have on the jig. And then we set this that is a little tight. We set this in the mortise. So you can think of this this is, you can think of this, I call this a joystick, but it's really a substitute rear rung and a substitute rear leg. The same diameter as the rear leg. It's just a different run. But what can we do with rise and run? We can describe the angle in different ways. So rather than making a separate joystick, so I can make a joystick that's the same run as the rear. Oh, we took it out. I didn't remember which one it is. Whichever one it is. Upper rear run would be this one. That's longer. But because we can drill, we can change the height of a step based on the run. So if we could make a joystick that was this long, just like this, with a little cylinder at the end, but then you'd have to make a different one for every chair. But what we've done here is we made one. We know that the run is 11.5. And when we look at this, so on the bottom rungs has an angle of 2 1/4 rise over 16 3/8 run, but at 11.5, it's 1.5 inches rise. So because we know that, we can make a step that if we were to make this step jig to work with this step would have to be, so this step is not 1.5 inches. It's 1.5 inches less than the height of the leg here. If we were to use a longer, this one with 16 3/8 run, this step would be lower. In fact, this step would probably get too low to work. So the way this works is we have a known height above the bench. At this point, that's why it's important to center this between those marks. We know how high the leg is above the bench from there, and then we subtract the rise from that. Remember, the rear leg is always higher. The rear leg that you're drilling is always higher than the opposite leg. So this is always going to be lower. So we use the same we use this same joystick for all the chairs. It's long enough to be accurate, short enough to be easy to use. So we would drill the bottom, rotate to the middle step, drill the middle, rotate to the top, drill the top. And then when you're done, remember, we do no dry fitting. And imagine I just pulled that rocker leg out of the jig. We have this long 49-inch rocker leg, bent and curved and shaped, with 5 mortises like that in it, every single one at a different angle. And we haven't tested it. And they always go together. It's nearly foolproof. Any question? I did skip one. I don't know what time it's. You guys bored yet? No? I have one thing I skipped that I can show you.
Figure out the jig system.
Well, this was a system that Brian was using. Now his jig for this was much more complicated and only did one thing. It was more complicated to build. The principle was exactly the same, but it had, I can't tell you how many of them I've made, for jig sets, and it just had all these parts. But all it did was hold the leg at this angle, and a specific height off the bench, same as this. So
You have one for each leg, top, middle, bottom, or something.
No, same. It was just a more complicated jig for holding, and all it did was the side runs into the rear legs. So I finally figured out after like 8 or 9 years And all I needed to do was make a new riser block for this and do the same thing rather than build a whole separate complicated jig, which was hard to build or a pain in the neck to build. So it had like 12 parts to it, maybe more. But all of it was the same thing as this. So this is just much simpler. So the entire jig set, if I were drawing, so the entire jig set, or let's say that armchair, this is what I love about this. Side rungs, rear legs, side rungs, front panel, and we take this one out and put it in here. So the entire jig set for drawing all 20 rungs into that chair would be what you see here plus a 1-inch riser block. You have another chair, different riser blocks, different step jigs. You can make them in 10 minutes. Cheap, easy, accurate. I can't think of anything bad to say about it. Let me tell you one little thing that I forgot to show you. And that was what happens if you have a chair and you want to figure out the drawing angles. Well, let's get that little Jenny chair. So if you have the chair, if you physically have it in your hands and you're allowed to move it around, what you can do, so if we want to figure out the riser block for drawing the side rungs into the rear legs, we can take our square. Set it up against the bottom leg, the leg on the bench. And then I'm going to take a wedge and set it under this leg until they touch. Right about there. Then you can measure that, and that happens to be that. There's a jig, 6-side rung. Same thing for the rear rungs. I'm going to push the wedge, slide. Much stuff. Rear leg gets. So we want 2 legs to touch right about there. Too far. And that riser block. So that's that one. So that's your jig set for this chair.
Any of your chairs have wood seats, or they all woven?
They're all woven. And then all you need is something for drilling the front and rear rungs, which would be the platform. Now, if you didn't, just one more thing. If you didn't have the chair, or they wouldn't let you do that with the chair, if you know the diameter of the legs and can measure either the distance between the legs, the back, the side, and the front, and you know the diameter of the legs, you can then figure out a trapezoid from that, because what we want is center to center. So if you measured from outside the legs and know the diameter, you would take the outside dimension minus the diameter of one leg, half on each, get a center to center, and do that for the sides and the front. And then from that, you can draw a trapezoid. That was a trapezoid for this chair, based on that. It may not be, this chair is a little funky. This, my son built this when he was first starting. And so it may not be exactly the same, but it'd be very, very close if you did that. So that's a way to work from an existing chair, two different ways. Either measuring or using a wedge to. Okay.
Was there a historic precedent for that chair, or was that just? Like you said, Brian based his design off.
Well, Jenny Alexander designed this chair.
So that was just.
I'm sure he had historic references, but I think he made it his own. What's that?
Appalachian ladder back.
Yeah, yeah. And, he made, it's a really nice, elegant design. It is very small for most people. But,
From the back piece is actually steamed and bent or?
yes. Mhm. Yeah, and they do the assembly a little different than we do, but, basically the same. So I really invite you to sit in these chairs, at least the ones that have seats on them. And they're really comfortable, especially the walker. When I, the slats are steam bent, yes. The rear legs and the slats. When I'm teaching class and the rocker is in a separate room from where the students are, if I tell them I'm going to sit down in the rocker for a few minutes, that's code from taking a nap. So,
Notice on the slats.
the slat mortises, I use a router. I have a router.
Just figure it out.
Excuse me.
A jig also.
Yeah, I have a router jig with template openings, one for each. And we set the leg in there and line it right and just cut it. Originally, the first couple of classes I took with Brian, we hand chopped the mortises. But for 6 mortises, it was like a whole day just doing that. It was just too much for a class.
Yeah.
And then the mortises are never as good as what you can do with a router. And I think if someone wants to do it hand chop, they can go home and figure out how to do it. But I think most students want to do it with a router. They're really clean and precise.
You bend the wood first and then router the slots or the
You mean
router the slots
legs?
first and then. Yeah.
No, the legs are bent first.
Legs are bent first.
Yes.
And you're out.
They're bent and there's some shaping to them.
Yeah.
They're still square in cross section, but there's some, there's usually something called a relief cut on here, a cut out in here, that's already done. But the legs have not been rounded over so that there's, you can reference them into a jig.
Okay, well, don't get up yet. I want you to notice that it's 9:20, and being a former teacher, you can always tell when you kept people's attention. I was sitting back here and watching, everyone was paying attention up here. So that's a compliment to what you have done tonight.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the Guild, and I'm sure all of these folks would say the same thing. Thank you very much. You may not know, he drove over 200 miles here. And I don't know what Greg did to coerce him to come down here. And he said he would give him a hotel room. Well, we're doing one more thing. I did a Google search to find out how much the IRS normally charges per mile or authorizes per mile. So I was over 200 miles there and 200 miles back. So on behalf of the Guild, we are giving you a little token to at least pay for your gas with the amount that you've got here. But again, thank you very much. This the first time we've gone past 9 o'clock and everyone's been sitting still and watching. So again, thank you very much for what you did.
My pleasure.
Okay, folks,